Hi, it's Michelle here at Escath Emporium again, and today I've still got this little Bernina 730 record on my workbench because the final thing that's not working on her, I think it's the final thing anyway, is this lever here. That little dial is what changes the needle position to from left to right center. So left, center, right, etc. But a lot of these models, and it's not just the 730, I've got a 640 that works in a very similar way and uses the same mechanism. And so this will help you with that sort of era, 60s, early 70s machine. This happens to be Betty Jean, and she is from 1969. So what I'm going to show you is how to unglue or unstick, unfreeze this little mechanism here. Nice nails with the dirty grease in them. What happens is the machine, with lack of use, lack of maintenance, all of the parts that move that have oil in them, the oil turns to varnish over time. Whether that's because they used the wrong oil or the oil is just old, who knows, but it does. And so what we've got to do is try and loosen up these mechanisms. And I've done that with this machine already. So everything is oiled, and that was the only thing left to unglue. What I've done is I have made sure that this mechanism here is to the back. Only reason for that is so that I have a little bit more space here to work on. I've also released this little screw which holds this, that stops the lid from dropping back. There's a tiny little pin that goes in there, so be careful you don't lose that in your machine. You don't have to take it out, but it does help. You could also just equally loosen these and take the whole lid off if you wanted to. For this little job, I recommend the biggest thing is patience. Honestly, it takes days to do this. I started off by oiling and moving whatever I could, oiling again. I tipped the machine onto its front so that the oil could try and penetrate through into this little mechanism here. I did all of that over 2 days. Still wasn't working. I then thought, okay, I'm going to do something that is fairly risky. So you're doing this at your own risk, but it's not working at the moment. And rather than taking this whole mechanism off, which I did on the 640, I'm going to try and do something a little bit different. But a word of caution, be very, very gentle. I have this little mallet / hammer. I think it's from a watchmaker's toolkit or something like that. And it's very lightweight, and that's what I'm going to use for my hammering. So I start off by loosening this mechanism. So that's that little nub there. I'm going to grab a pointy tool. So this little nub here has got a spring in here, and it's meant to spring in and out as this moves left to right. And you can see if it's all the way here, the needle's one direction, all the way there, it's the opposite direction, and that's in the middle, the center of the machine. So that was frozen, and so was the spring and that pin. I took a block of wood. If you have a little block of wood that's quite small like that, that would be ideal. The other thing I found afterwards, really a sturdy pen, anything that's plastic or wood which will not damage anything. That's what I would use. So what I did was just pretend this is a little thin piece of wood. I propped that against here. So on the side here, okay, let's get the pointy thing in there. On this edge here, you want to place your block of wood along this edge here. You could also do it from this edge here. Just be careful and move these levers out of the way if you're going to work from this direction. I placed my little block of wood very gently onto that edge, and using my little tiny hammer, I tapped super gently so that it would move. And eventually it moved. It was still very stiff, but that first movement is just cracked that varnish, and I think that helps and gets you underway. I then went to the opposite side with my block of wood and I repeated that so it moved back this way. And you can see that that then started to move. The problem I had is that it was really sticking badly, and that's because the pin wasn't moving in and out. This was moving very difficultly, with great difficulty rather, should I say. And once I'd got that, so we've gently tapped that across and back again using a little block of wood or a pen or something like that. Honestly, it doesn't take much force, and you do not want to use a lot of force to do this. What I then managed to do was get a pointed tool in there, and for that I used an awl, and I managed to get my awl into here so that I pushed this little pin out of the way. When I did that, I managed to push this block all the way to the other side out of the way. Let's see if I can get it. There you go. Now it is this, don't get me wrong, this has jumped out now because I've actually already released it. Let me see if I can get a flat screwdriver to show you that. So this block which holds this is moved. I can now much more freely push on this little button. Okay. It took a lot of patience to get that done. How I did that was with my awl and with a flat screwdriver. Same thing, I put that in there, or your little block of wood, and using this, I gently tapped it. At first, it went all the way in and stuck. That's absolutely what you're going to expect. Once it's done that, I oiled it again, put some spray oil like a tri-flow or whatever you've got, and then using a pointy instrument, do you see that slot there? I put the awl into that slot and I then pushed it like this. And what it did was, I'm going to get my fingers in there. Sorry, I won't with that. I'm going to get the screwdriver. Pretend that's stuck in. You can just see there that little metal piece. And when I move this, it disappears. And that's because this is the shaft of this button. And I got my awl in there and I pulled it backwards like this until it popped out. I had to repeat that about 20 times before it actually released it and the spring started working again. In between, I oiled it again. You can apply some heat as well. I had a tiny little blowtorch which I used, and I also used my soldering iron on there. That will then release that. And eventually you won't need this awl anymore because this is going to jump in and out on its own. Be careful because it might jump out. So whatever you do, just get it working freely before you move to the next stage. So what you do next is you've got to push the button back in. And while the button is pushed in, you want to turn your dial so that it slots back into there. Now, when you turn this, the spring mechanism allows that button to pop in and out along these ridges, and that determines the position of your needle. This is the way to do it. I found it worked really well with tons of patience and extreme care and caution, rather than having to take apart the whole button mechanism, because believe me, this little pin to come out of this mechanism is very difficult. I'm now going to reinstall this. I put the pin back through here, tighten that up, and we can then return these levers to where they belong. And your machine selector, needle selector position knob is now working freely as it should, and this is your stitch width selector, which works independently without being stuck. Some machines you'll find the two are connected together, and you'll need to do the same whole heat and oil treatment as well. I hope you found that useful. I certainly am relieved I've managed to find a way that hasn't damaged the machine, but has actually fixed the problem. So have a wonderful day and happy sewing on your beautiful vintage Bernina sewing machines now that you've managed to get them up and running again. Have a lovely day. Bye bye.